speak about my practice and this particular exhibition. I'd like to start to use my notes for the beginning of my talk because I do have a tendency to go off at tangents. So I'll use that as an outline to start with, and then I'll welcome questions after I've gone through my outline. Would you like to come in? Would you like to join us for the talk? Yeah, come in, come in. I'd like to open with two quotes from two people whom I respect very much, two artists, and their words have really expressed for me a real sense of what my work's about. And one is from Sidney Nolan, and the other one is from Paul Caponigro. And Sidney Nolan said that art was always to me a means of getting in touch with another world. You could never see that other world and were never told about it, but art seemed to always be kind of touching it. And Sidney Nolan's quote on the surface is probably more apparent, and for those who are familiar with my previous works on the subject matter of water. Excuse me. Would you like to come in? Would you like this chair? Would you like this chair? But with all my photographs, including this body of work, I'm exploring the unseen and the unspoken. Paul Caponigro said that at the root of creativity is an impulse to understand, to make sense of random and often unrelated details. For me, photography provides an intersection of time, space, light and emotional stance. One needs to be still enough, observant enough, and aware enough to recognise the life of the materials and to be able to hear with the eyes. At the root of Paul Caponigro's creativity is an impulse to understand, and I would say that as well, that impulse to understand is at the core of my photographic practice and my life. He states that one needs to be still enough. Being still enough for me isn't about just being still taking a photograph or having my camera still. It's about a certain stillness within. For me, it's about clearing away all the clutter in my life and clearing away everything so that I'm left with looking at what's important. To help create this stillness, I have a studio in a quiet location. I practice yoga and meditation, and I find that when I'm committed to my practice, I connect with my intuition and ideas with ease, and I get in touch with that unseen quality that Sidney Nolan was speaking about, that hidden quality of an image that I can explore further. Being observant enough is paramount. Firstly, it's the fine details visually which are important. That's okay. Thank you. I realised the full significance of observing these fine details just recently on my journey to Melbourne, when I found myself for the very first time writing in an email to a friend descriptions of what I observed. To illustrate the fine details in a verbal sense, I'll give a few examples of what I wrote. I said in the email, "The roadside is plump with bulging cushions of lime-shaded leaves, with sprays of seed heads exploding like fireworks. Guideposts awkwardly try to hit over the tops of the grasses. Soft green velour covers the paddocks where the cattle look like they've been brushed with shiny black oil." So I was looking at the fine details visually. Said trunks like burnt toast held leaves which glimmered like spilling silver gold coins from the treasure sheds to the ocean floor. So I was looking not just at leaves, but I was looking at that extra visual detail, which is really important to observe. I also saw people rather as well as just the environment. I took notice of small details in physical appearance. I wrote, seeing the old locals gather at Lightning Ridge was like looking at a table at a primary school fete. Shirtless old skin like caramel, amber toffees with hundreds and thousands of melanomas and fudges and chocolate with whiskers of coconut. So I noticed visual details which helped me connect with what was unseen behind those visual details. But it's not just the visual details which are important to be observant of. And just as I recently realised, it's the hidden, unseen details which are important to notice as well. It's that ability, as Paul Capronegro said, to hear with the eyes. Once again, I'll illustrate verbal examples and shortly I'll look at the unseen details in this particular body of work. A farmer with sun-bleached eyes, grey with dust and unfulfilled wishes. So I saw his eyes and there was this unseen element that was behind his eyes. And I also wrote, soft green pistachios with skin splitting were scooped out of a box by a young woman with a hand-knit scarf, sun-drenched working hands and Jackie Onassis sunglasses which couldn't block the dreams in her own eyes. So it's these unseen details, sun-bleached eyes, grey with dust and unfulfilled wishes, that are important to notice as well. And to do so, I need to have that stillness in myself. I need to hear with my eyes and to connect with something which helps me to understand. Now, in this body of work of photographs taken whilst I was travelling around Australia, the first thing I noticed were the visual details, the chairs on the verandas, the colours of the rugs, the paint, the timber and the cushions. I always ask permission to take photographs of people's veranda spaces, so I took a big breath and knocked on their door hoping they would be receptive to the idea of taking a photograph of their home, except this one. This one I needed to capture very quickly as the sun was setting, and I thought, I need to do this before I ask permission. I hope it will be okay. It was. I found that very early on that I needed to have a few samples of photographs in my hand and to just wear thongs and casual clothes. In that way, they didn't feel like I was a salesman or a reporter wielding a big camera, and they didn't feel threatened or uncomfortable. Invariably, they'd ask me for a cup of tea, and they started to share with me their own family photographs and their stories. This is where the unseen element of my work developed. I was learning to not only hear with my ears, but to hear with my eyes, observing the photographs on the walls in their own lounge rooms, observing their homes, and in particular, observing the small traces of their life which they had now allowed to be seen in their veranda spaces. I listened to their stories, not only through my ears, but through what I saw. Hearing their words filled in the gaps and explained their own personal history, but I soon found out that it was the small visual details which also spoke of that history, if I just allowed myself to listen. There were rubbish bins, small toy cars, chairs without seats, coloured hand-knitted rugs, ramps into doorways. All these visual details suggested something else, something which was unseen. At the same time I was travelling and taking these photographs, I was scanning my own family photograph albums for my sister, and I started to examine my own family history and connect with my own story